Funding for New Mexico in Focus provided by viewers like you.
This week on New Mexico in Focus, politics on the map. What a state Supreme Court decision means for two redistricting lawsuits, one from the Republican Party and the other from the Navajo Nation.
Yes, there's a lot of political gamesmanship in redistricting. It's a part of the wheels that turn.
And two journalists warn of the long-lasting dangers of cluster bombs as the White House sends them to Ukraine. New Mexico in Focus starts now. Thanks for joining us this week. I'm your host, Gene Grant. All eyes are on Paul Krebs this month as the former UNM athletic director stands trial on two felony embezzlement charges for allegedly misappropriating thousands in public money. In about 15 minutes, senior producer Lou DeVizio sits down with reporter Daniel Libet to discuss the rarity of the case he's been following since day one. In the second half of today's show, New Mexico in Focus political correspondent Gwyneth Dolan speaks with two voting rights advocates about a state Supreme Court decision to allow a lawsuit over political gerrymandering to continue in district court. But first, we begin with a special panel discussion on the state's foster care system and a court case that culminated in a massive $485 million jury award on behalf of a child rape victim. Welcome to our special panel for this week. We're happy to be joined in person in our Albuquerque studios by Ed Williams. He's from Searchlight, New Mexico. Across the table is Merritt Allen of Vox Optima Public Relations. And back across the table next to Ed is Carol Suzuki. We welcome her. She's a law professor at the University of New Mexico. Now we begin with that verdict out of Rio Arriba County in the case of that 8-year-old child who was allegedly raped by her foster parent in northern New Mexico. Earlier this month, the jury awarded $485 million in damages on behalf of a girl who was living in a specialized foster care program that was supposed to provide her with behavioral health services. But the lawsuit, first filed in 2019, alleges a nonprofit company called Family Works, licensed by CYFD, placed the 8-year-old girl in the care of Clarence Garcia, who repeatedly raped her. The lawsuit also alleges Family Works knew about prior sexual assault allegations against Mr. Garcia. Now, that $485 million award appears to be the largest in state's history. And Merritt, when we see an amount like that, we tend to think the jury was sending a message. Now, what was that message in this case in your view?
New Mexicans have absolutely had it with the child welfare system.
Right. Bottom line.
We're just done.
Mm-hmm.
We're just done.
Mm-hmm.
And it was as much an indictment against CYFD as it was against Family Works.
Right.
Our child welfare system, it's not a matter of foster parents missing medical appointments or a kid going to school in the winter without a coat.
Right.
Children are being abused and children are dying, and it happens every month. And New Mexicans are done with it.
Right, exactly. Carol, first of all, welcome to the table. Welcome to New Mexico PBS and The Line. Good to see you. I got a question about what Merritt's point here. Does the state's repeated history of foster child care abuse make the impact? Did it make an impact on this verdict and this judgment to have this much money on top of it?
So the verdict of $485 million is $80 million in compensatory damages, meaning the child's emotional damages, her past expenses, her future medical expenses for the trauma from the assault. And that would mean that $405 million is for punitive damages. The punitive damages, they do send a message, but they send a message to Acadia to not do this again, to do this misconduct, to punish Acadia and the other defendants, and also to other organizations that do this kind of work to deter them from this type of conduct. Mm-hmm. But the punitive damages are for this case, for this child. They're not to indict these companies for all of the other children who have been abused in the system, but who were not before this jury.
Mm-hmm. Interesting points there. I want to circle back to one thing you mentioned there in just a quick sec, but I want to introduce Ed. Thank you for being at the table as well. I love your work over there. You've reported extensively for Searchlight about failures in the state CYFD system. Mr. Garcia has a direct connection to this case out of Rio Arriba County, certainly according to your reporting, but where does this case fit in the broader problems that you've documented for a lot of years now about CYFD? Where does the Garcia thing fit into that overall picture?
Well, I mean, I think that the Throughout the course of my reporting on this, on CYFD, I mean, one thing that we see pretty regularly is kind of a desperation on the part of the state to find a bed for a kid, any bed, it doesn't matter where. We reported that Family Works and a number of other foster care companies were receiving repeated violations of their licensing requirements, but we're still getting renewed. And so we have kids getting sent to places where abuse is occurring, where there are people with criminal histories, fostering children. We have kids living in homeless shelters and the state CYFD office building.
Wow, in the office building.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Oh my gosh.
And this is because there's just nowhere to put these kids. And so we see a pattern of the state just trying to find a bed. I mean, part to avoid them being in the office building, right? But they'll put a kid somewhere and then come, do the safety checks, the background checks and stuff later. And so, this is just another case of children being placed in inappropriate places that could have been avoided, but we have never had a functioning foster care system, and this is what we see as a result.
Merritt, several defendants, Ms. Suzuki named a couple, but in the lawsuit includes the former foster parents, the nonprofit Family Works, Inc., Acadia Healthcare that was mentioned, and its subsidiaries, Youth and Family Centered Services of New Mexico and Desert Hills. A lot of people, potentially touched up here. But the state was not named a defendant in this case. Any sense of why?
That I don't know, and that's sort of a surprise. However, the state has its own issues and its own lawsuits. One thing that kind of concerns me with this and the volume of it, while I can't say it's not justified, although it is extremely large. One thing that I think is concerning, we've already seen a healthcare crisis regarding a provider shortage caused in part by no caps on malpractice, driving insurance rates up, driving providers out of the state. We're already, as Ed pointed out, in a child welfare crisis with a lack of beds for kids. This will drive insurance rates up. And we've already had a purge of providers at the hands of CYFD, and this may discourage providers from coming to the state or drive more providers out.
Interesting point there. What's your prediction on that? What's your sense of it?
I think it will definitely make the pool of available providers smaller on the private side for sure.
Yeah, that needs some attention for sure.
If I could just,
please, go ahead, Ed.
To the question of why wasn't CYFD named, this was happening at a time when CYFD was trying to shut down, was really embedding in residential treatment centers, including Desert Hills, which was running Family Works. So the licensing department of CYFD was trying to bring this company into compliance. And that's part of the reason that the attorneys didn't think that they were necessarily complicit in this problem, because they were active. And this is one of, this is one of several residential treatment programs and foster care programs that have been shut down. And you're right, there's a deficit now of beds. And that's why we have kids living in homeless shelters. That's why we have kids who need mental health care in the CYFD office, because we've shut these companies down.
Every time I drive by Hogares on Griegos, my stomach clenches, thinking about the work they used to do years ago, and they're not doing it now. It's a shame. Carol, question, what's likely to happen next in this case? Is this simply a matter of a series of checks being written, I hate to say it that way, or will there be a legal challenge and a long road ahead? What's your again, you're not in the room, I'm not asking you to make predictions here, but your sense of that, if you were in the room, what direction would you think they would be going in?
Well, I believe that there are 3 other children who are alleged to have been abused by Mr. Garcia. So there are 3 upcoming trials. So the defendants need to think about what are they going to do. Are they going to go forward with those trials? Are they going to try to settle those matters? As is this particular matter, there are a number of options. I don't know what defendants actually will do, but they could go back to the judge and ask that the judge either reconsider even the merits of the case or just the damages themselves, saying that they were excessive. They could also appeal to the Court of Appeals.
Oh, no kidding. Interesting. And what would be the process there if they appealed to the Court of Appeals? What would be the outcome they might be looking for?
They would also be looking for a reduction of damages and perhaps also a redetermination on the merits of the case.
Oh, interesting. That far into it. Okay, interesting point there. Ed, let me stay on this side of the table for a quick second. Something I want to ask you about this. What responsibility does the state have over these companies that they're doing thorough research on where they're placing kids and such? Who is watching over these companies? Does the state have a system to do that as well?
Well, CYFD is responsible for making sure that the companies are in compliance. The companies are basically, we outsource. This is treatment foster care, not regular foster care, so it's a higher level of care. Okay. And it's usually run by nonprofits. This company with Ernesto Garcia was a for-profit company, but that's a little unusual. So they're licensed by CYFD's licensing department. And then they are responsible for placing the kids and making sure that they're in compliance with state law. Right. I mean, but what we found in our reporting is that there would be, serious violations of licensing, requirements like failure to do safety checks, criminal background histories, all these different kinds of things for foster parents. Wow. And that the license would be renewed anyway. It's almost a rubber stamp process. And so that, I think, gets back to this issue of this desperation to find a place for these kids. And this, we just cut corners so we can find a bed. Mm-hmm.
Let me ask the question to all of you here, just about a minute each. Say with you, Ed, what's the deeper consequences here for the children in the middle of these cases? Is there any amount of money that can make up for these kind of abuses?
I mean, it's hard for me to put myself in the position of these kids, but you have to remember, I mean, these are children who are in the system because they were traumatized and abused. Right. I mean, they wouldn't be in this situation in the first place, if they had come from a safe background and hadn't suffered trauma. So there's something just doubly cruel about having a system that re-traumatizes them after, as kids, they've been abused by their parents or guardians. So, I don't know if you can put a dollar amount on this kind of thing.
Good points there. Carol Suzuki, again. Can it make up, because money can't make up for everything, but it can help some things. So what's your sense of that as well?
Right, when we talk about these civil wrongs, the only thing the court can do is provide money. And there's no amount of money that can ever really make this child whole. You can never take away the fact that she was repeatedly assaulted by people who were supposed to take care of her, that she was put in a very dangerous position. So she can get treatment with that money, but it will never really make her whole. And I'd also like to comment in terms of caps. So these types of cases generally are taken by attorneys who work on contingency, meaning they put in effort and money, and they only get paid if the plaintiff gets a settlement or gets an award from the court. So when there are caps, it means that the juries are not able to really compensate the plaintiff for what the jury thinks should be given to this particular plaintiff. And also, the attorneys might not get fully paid, and what the contingency money they're taking is really from the plaintiff. And so one of our concerns should be is that when there are caps on tort awards, which is a civil wrong, then attorneys might not take these cases, right? And it would be a problem because an 8-year-old child in therapeutic foster care, she can't pay an hourly rate to an attorney to take this case. She needs someone who's willing to take the risk to protect her and to make these claims against these defendants.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad you got that in, Ms. Suzuki. Absolutely. Give the last word to you, Merritt. I mean, again, money, as we've heard, money can't make up for everything, but is the message strong enough to get some change going here in New Mexico?
I think it's certainly gets everyone's attention, but as Ed said, as we were preparing to tape, child welfare stories get everyone's attention now. I mean, it's certainly, I think, in most New Mexicans' minds as a concern. And the point that's been made throughout this segment is there aren't enough beds, and it's very hard to get and recruit new foster parents. And I would just like to make a plea, if it's something you've thought about. There's an organization, New Mexico Children First. It's nmchildfirst.org, and they offer resources and training for foster parents, because that's one area where CYFD is lacking, is training and resources, and oftentimes foster parents don't really know what they're supposed to do next. And New Mexico Child First offers a lot of resources for foster parents. So if you're thinking about fostering, I suggest you go to that website. They'll help you and bring you along, because obviously that's what's needed, is more beds for kids.
That's right, and homes, people willing to get into the game. Exactly right. Thanks to Ed Williams from Searchlight, New Mexico, UNM Law Professor Carol Suzuki, and Merritt Allen from Vox Optima Public Relations. You can join the conversation too. Just send a note to our Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram pages.
Arizona uses what I consider a scalpel, like a surgeon does. Very specifically cut redistricting lines utilizing census blocks. However, on New Mexico, we use the chainsaw.
We turn now to an inside look at the trial of former University of New Mexico Athletic Director Paul Krebs. He's charged with 2 counts of felony embezzlement stemming from allegations that he used public money to send himself, his family, and prospective donors to Scotland for a golf trip in 2015. Now, as we record this Thursday, the prosecution has rested. Krebs is on the witness stand, and closing arguments will follow. Now, this week, senior producer Lou DiVizio sits down with Daniel Libet, an investigative and enterprise reporter for Sportico, who's been following the case. And as Mr. Libet explains, it's extremely uncommon for an athletic director to face criminal charges in a job-related scandal.
Daniel Libet, thank you for joining me here on New Mexico in Focus.
Great to be here.
I wanted to start with a quick summary of the accusations against former UNM athletic director Paul Krebs. We know that this is all tied to a 2015 golf trip, something that wouldn't be uncommon for university athletics departments or a bunch of boosters. But can you walk us through how prosecutors say that Krebs broke the law in this scenario?
Yeah, it's a bit esoteric, but we'll give it a shot here. So the allegation stemmed from the fact that Paul Krebs contracted with the university's travel agency, Anthony Travel, for a trip, put the university then on the hook for a $250,000 booster trip with the idea that this money was going to be largely recouped by having a bunch of boosters then pay for their freight to go to Scotland. When he was unable to do this, the allegation is that he then used money in the athletic department that was sort of set aside as a rainy day fund, University of New Mexico being a public institution, the athletic department money therefore being public monies, and then used that money and moved it over to the Lobo Club, the outside nonprofit fundraising arm for the university, to sort of cover this gap in the expenditures for this trip. There wasn't enough money raised. It wasn't a matter of enough money raised. There wasn't enough people who he could get to go on this trip. And so he used public monies to cover the shortfall. And that is where all of these allegations originate. But then, of course, they expanded and then have since been scaled down to include things about how he behaved in the wake of this discovery when it was reported 2 years after the fact by KRQE that public money had been used to cover some of the costs associated with this trip. And now prosecutors have sort of, the judge and the prosecutors have dropped several of the charges. So the counts now are just about the money and the alleged misuse of public monies towards this trip.
In a story that you wrote just last week for Sportico, you pointed out how rare it is for university athletic directors to face criminal charges in a scandal like this, or really at all. Was there something different about this case that brought it to that level?
It's a great question. It's hard to say. I mean, not on the merits, probably. I could point to 100 athletic department scandals across the country in just the last decade that would seem to require greater accountability and maybe even criminal investigations that never went there. I mean, if we think about former Lobo coach Dave Bliss and the saga of him at Baylor with Patrick Dennehy, the former Lobo player who was killed. As far as I know, I mean, Bliss was never criminally charged. I don't believe he was even criminally investigated. So we're really looking, the only other example is the Sandusky sex abuse scandal at Penn State, where the athletic director who was presiding over the department at the time was brought up on criminal charges. Him and Krebs, in terms of the Division I, the major college sports landscape, kind of a rare company over the last 3-4 decades of athletic directors who were criminally prosecuted for matters related to their work. So very rare. Why this happened at New Mexico probably had as much to do with the climate at the time as it had with the charges themselves. If we recall, we're talking 2015, 16, 17, the athletic department was not in good shape. There was the failed Wise Pies naming rights deal of the basketball arena. There were questions about the pit suites and whether or not they had been properly accounted or paid for. There was the criminal prosecution of a low-level men's basketball staffer named Cody Hopkins on embezzlement charges. That case is still pending. And so there was this aura of scandal and media scrutiny over the athletic department. And first the state auditor got involved in scrutinizing the finances, and then the Attorney General's office got involved. And whether or not Paul Krebs ultimately deserves to be convicted, a lot of the things that he had done in the wake of these investigations seemed suspicious. I mean, he was prone towards hiding things and trying to cover things. He created a fictitious story about how he reimbursed the university for the money, for some $25,000 that is alleged to have been misspent. He sought to delete emails so that reporters couldn't gain access from them through public records requests. So he might have brought more of this. He might have ultimately brought this prosecution on himself by some of his behavior in the aftermath of its discovery.
Now, you've been a leading voice for covering college athletics as a business for a long time, going back to your days with nmfishbowl.com. Do you think that there would be more public scrutiny of athletic directors like there is in this Krebs case if more sports journalists took that approach?
Yeah, I mean, this was sort of my rosebud. I was covering politics before I started blogging about the Lobos in 2016, and my whole ethos of it was let me kind of confront this athletics department within a unique kind of media scrutiny and really investigate it and see how not only what I find, but also how the athletic department responded. And Krebs was a subject that I wrote about quite frequently. He was, of course, the person in charge of the department at the time. And the reaction was telling, not just by him, but by others at UNM, by others in the state, other elected officials, in terms of how they responded to, in many cases, this source of great pride, seeing it scrutinized, seeing it getting kind of relentless media attention, and not of the kind that covers the games, but of the kind that covers the off-field events. And, I was not my reporting did not instigate this investigation. That credit goes to Larry Barker at KRQE. But clearly there was a way of reacting to media scrutiny that was problematic and troubling, and is a case study really for how transparency pays. And one could even dial back for Paul Krebs and recreate the scenario had he just issued a public mea culpa and said, I am going to pay $25,000 out of my own pocket to reimburse this money because, this was my mistake, whether or not he would have been prosecuted and whether or not he would have even had to retire in the manner that he had done.
Now, the witness list in this specific case includes some household names around here anyways, including a former UNM president, a university CFO, and others. Now, we're recording this Wednesday. The trial's expected to wrap up maybe Friday. So some of those folks have already testified, and some will testify still in open court. Their former colleagues' freedom is really at stake. What does this all mean for the community, and what does it say about the business of college sports that you talk about in general?
I mean, to me, that's the issue. That's the elephant in the room that no one wants to address. When all of these issues were going on with the finances in the athletic department, people were looking for a scapegoat. People were looking for an individual who had sort of ruined this perfectly running operation. And of course, the operation has struggled. It has labored in this sort of no man's land of college athletics. It is a mid-major program that is striving financially to compete in an arena that it just cannot compete. And in many ways, what we have seen with the Scotland trip and the aftermath is a sort of microcosm or manifestation of that. I mean, this is really, in totality, much less about how Paul Krebs as a administrator behaved. The larger story is about college sports and college sports in New Mexico and the relationship between college sports and higher ed. And so, I think the first couple of days of testimony, one almost got the sense when former boosters or current boosters took the stand to defend the validity of the trip, almost to extol the trip as a reason why they have committed, in some cases, millions of dollars towards the athletic department. It's possible that, at least on the stand, this trip is going to be rehabilitated in the public image, to say nothing of whether or not Krebs is going to be found not guilty. But the larger story is still there, which is how institutions respond to public scrutiny and how they reconcile this very difficult conundrum of having a college athletic department, especially at an institution that is not in the upper echelons of college sports.
Now, talking about how institutions deal with those problems and scrutiny, in your story you talk about what really you see as a culture of secrecy inside many universities and athletic departments, and we've seen the consequences of that. You brought up the Sandusky case in Penn State, Nassar at Michigan State, but what mechanisms have universities and athletic departments in particular used to hide information, and why, from your perspective, do those justifications break down?
Yeah, well, one of the things that they use are outside entities, so, the story is not just about the University of New Mexico, it's about the UNM Foundation and the Lobo Club, these two outside entities that really are there only to serve the university. I'm involved in this story myself. I have filed lawsuits, public records lawsuits, against the UNM Foundation and the Lobo Club for records that are directly related to the Scotland scandal and the Krebs prosecution. One of those cases, the UNM Foundation lawsuit, is currently before the Supreme Court. Oral arguments are scheduled, I believe, for September 11th. So, what I recognized early on in reporting on the Lobos, and as I've noticed in virtually every other institution of its kind, is this use of these outside entities to not only raise money for the institutions, but keep secret many of the records that pertain to the public business of a public university. And again, if not just as a asset and as a need for the public to be able to scrutinize the finances of its taxpayer-funded institutions, but for the institutions themselves to operate at the highest caliber. Transparency does pay, even though in the short term, it might seem to the individuals running these institutions, maybe it's better if we keep certain things secret.
When it comes to this specific case, should people expect it to be a precedent when it all ends? Do you think that seeing criminal charges for the first time will give universities like UNM more pause when using that keep it in-house mentality?
Possibly. It would be a nice thought. It doesn't seem to be the reflex. There's been plenty of other instances where universities should be recognized. And it's not just universities, it's just, our elected officials and our public servants should recognize a value and an ethic for transparency and ignore it. Again, all of these things theoretically sound good. And then there's an individual in the seat of scrutiny, and they have the decision whether or not to be the ones to potentially make their own jobs more difficult and give themselves headaches. And traditionally, it seems that they often decide, not I. And so we just repeat the cycle over and over again. I think certainly UNM, this is probably reverberating regardless of what the verdict is. But different circumstances will come along, and different individuals will have their own rationale for why they shouldn't be the ones to step forward and be open and transparent.
A recent ruling from the New Mexico Supreme Court could fundamentally change political redistricting in the state. The justices weighed in on a lawsuit brought by the state Republican Party and others, challenging the new congressional districts drawn by the Democrat-controlled state legislature. Their order sends the case back to district court in Clovis, But the Supreme Court's decision could impact another case too, a lawsuit brought by the Navajo Nation against San Juan County commissioners. Now, the tribe accuses commissioners of packing Native American voters into a single district, limiting their voting power in a county where Native Americans make up 40% of the population. New Mexico in Focus political correspondent Gwyneth Dolan caught up with two people familiar with these cases. Hannah Burling from Fair Districts, New Mexico, and Leonard Gorman of the Navajo Nation Human Rights Commission. As they explain, each of these lawsuits could make a significant impact in future elections.
My guests today are Leonard Gorman with the Navajo Nation Human Rights Commission and Hannah Burling, who heads up Fair Districts, New Mexico. Hannah, I want to ask you this. Political junkies, partisans, they just want to know one thing about what's happening in this game called redistricting. Is this a decisive win for Republicans in New Mexico or no?
No, because we don't have the opinion yet. We have the order, but as far as I know, we don't have the written opinion. So it's not a decisive victory. It is going back to the district judge.
And then, but this acceptance of the case, this determination that the Supreme Court made to send it back to the district court with some advice, does that mean, is that an endorsement that the Republicans claim that Democrats unfairly politically gerrymandered the state's 3 congressional districts? Does this decision say there's merit to that?
This decision says that can be examined, that claim can be examined. And the fascinating thing to us is that they are asking the district judge to use Justice Kagan's 3 criteria in her written dissent in 2019 in Rucho.
All right. And what are those 3 points?
Well, the 3 points are: first, was this deliberate partisan gerrymandering? Second, did it succeed?
Yeah.
And third, was there any other reason for drawing the lines in that way?
Leonard Gorman, you have participated in redistricting in all of the states that the Navajo Nation occupies. You've been through several cycles. You've seen a lot of this. Is there a lot of partisan gerrymandering going on in redistricting in the Four Corners area in this past cycle? Did you see that?
Yes, there's a lot of political gamesmanship in redistricting. It's a part of the wheels that turn when we talk about redistricting. There's partisanship in all different angles, the Republican, the Democrats, the independents. And on the Arizona side, the Independent Redistricting Commission is made up of the 3 major political parties, the Republicans, Democrats, and Independent. And on the New Mexico side, the same situation. In Utah, the same circumstance that affect the redrawing of maps, even to the local level. So that's a part of the dynamics of redistricting.
As the state redistricts for congressional seats and for legislative seats, there's also redistricting, and sometimes we forget about this, in cities and counties and other bodies, right? So what does your lawsuit say that the San Juan County Commission did wrong?
You know, at the height of the 1965 Voting Rights Act, I recall, for example, in 2011, it was a very important and instrumental basis of redistricting. And one of them was the Section 5 preclearance. And I recall specifically when Navajo Nation participated in these discussions on redistricting in all the 3 states and at the county level. People that drew lines, approved those lines, had the responsibility to listen to the Navajo Nation at that time.
Because, let me just interrupt you to recap, because preclearance meant that the Department of Justice had review power over those plans before they were put into place, right?
Yes, before any election laws that relate to voting became or implemented in those areas, in those jurisdictions. But of course, since that time, there has been a downward spiral on the chipping away at the 1965 law. In June of 2013, the U.S. Supreme Court brought down the pre-clearance requirement, saying that it's outdated. And I think that was the fear and the anticipation of the most recent decision in the Milligan case, that the current sitting U.S. Supreme Court would further dilute the strength of the U.S. Voting Rights Act.
So in this case with San Juan County, you're saying that the commissioners unfairly packed Navajo voters into districts that would reduce their ability to elect more commissioners. Are the seats on that commission now apportioned fairly? Have they been in the past, or have Navajo voters in that area not been represented fairly on the commission, in your opinion?
I think the Milligan case is a good example of what the Navajo Nation is litigating in New Mexico, San Juan County. It's a clearly accurate reflection of what's going on in the county. And as you can tell from the way the case evolved all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And that's where in those areas, the minorities sought the second district that they believe could be designed to elect another candidate of their choice. Similarly here, the litigation that the Navajo Nation believes that there is an opportunity for the second district to where that Navajos can elect a candidate of their choice.
Right. Hannah, I want to come back to you and the case that the Supreme Court sent back to a judge in the conservative southeastern part of the state. You think that this decision from the New Mexico State Supreme Court is the least partisan decision?
I do believe that. And
Why?
I believe that it is because it is, first of all, the Republicans have not won a victory. I'm not going to speak to the merits of that case. I don't believe I'm qualified. But they are going to have their complaints examined. And they are going to be examined under Justice Kagan's criteria.
So you think this is the best thing that could happen for voters in New Mexico of all parties?
Yes, I do. I do believe that. I believe that voters in all parties frequently feel that their voice is not heard, their votes don't count, and that it is deliberate on the part of those who have other beliefs. We are a very divided nation at this point.
So the process of this district judge going through and examining what the New Mexico State Legislature did in drawing up that, in approving those districts, that process will bring to light, do you think it will impact voters' perception of the integrity of the system and the fairness of the process?
I hope that it will. I see this as offering a real chance for voters to understand that, and I'm hoping that voters will be given enough clarity on the subject to get that. The maps that the Citizens Redistricting Committee drew were very good maps, but they were changed by the legislature. And we think there's an inherent conflict of interest when elected officials can draw their own districts. The other problem was that the CRC, while they worked very, very hard, they went all over the state, they took a ton of public input. There were 7 members. There was no one from any of the sovereign nations in New Mexico. There was only 1 woman, and everyone came from central New Mexico.
Yes, Leonard, you have observed the work of the Arizona Independent Redistricting Body. Does that function pretty well in your opinion? It's a totally different model. But its independence is something that Hannah's group has been pushing for. How do you think it works in Arizona?
It depends on exactly what independence that you're seeking. I think the people in Arizona back in the year 2000 initiated a proposition in which the redistricting would be taken away from the legislature, and that there would be an independent commission established to draw those lines and have the full authority to approve those redistricting plans. Now, there's no independence from the political gerrymandering aspects, even in this independent redistricting commission. But there's some vast differences between Arizona and New Mexico. I always believe that New Mexico is antiquated. It's behind times. New Mexico uses this huge collection of population that's referenced to precinct boundaries. Precinct boundaries are for voting purposes. It's not for population and redistricting.
Right. And what you're pointing to here is something that voters in Albuquerque probably don't really notice. But when you get out to the Navajo Nation, then you realize these lines feel much more arbitrary, right?
Correct. And the Navajo Nation does things different from what the counties do. So when you draw county precinct boundaries on the Navajo Nation, there is an element of disenfranchising Navajo voters because you specifically intentionally not draw precinct boundaries along Navajo political boundaries. But the legislature was helpful in the last session by passing House Bill 4, in which now it's required that the counties respect, for example, the Navajo chapter boundaries. But back to the differences between Arizona and New Mexico, Arizona uses what I consider a scalpel, like a surgeon does. Very specifically cuts redistricting lines utilizing census blocks. However, on New Mexico, we use the chainsaw. And we pick up chunks of populations using precinct boundaries. That's really unfair to the voters in the state of New Mexico.
That's a great analogy. I really love the way you just put that. So using a scalpel to carve out these census blocks, the way that the U.S. Census puts people in little areas is quite precise, and you're able to group people together in communities of interest easier than if you use these precinct boundaries, which might be really large, and lump people in ways that they don't feel kin to people in the same lump. We chainsaw, you were saying. I love that.
Yeah, and basically who really does set the tone for redistricting is the county clerks. They set the tone for redistricting every decennial period.
Right. That makes those elections important too. Let me ask you to kind of wrap this up. Hannah, what is next? What are we going to see next in this lawsuit that the Republicans have brought saying the Democrats unfairly politically gerrymandered the congressional district lines? What should we see next?
Well, what we will be seeing next is the written opinion. And then we'll be seeing how the district court judge applies that.
Okay, so he's going to have some rules set by the state Supreme Court for determining whether this is unfair or not.
Right,
okay.
Right.
And that'll come in the next few weeks. Leonard Gorman, what is next in the Navajo Nation's lawsuit against the San Juan County Commission saying they unfairly disenfranchised Navajo voters in that county? What happens next?
One of the most important part in any form of protecting voting rights is public education. It's important to educate the public how they're affected by these decisions that are made, not only at the state level, but also at the local level, such as the counties, such as the school boards. It's important to ensure that all voters, Navajo voters particularly on the northwest quadrant of the state, where Indigenous peoples have a full opportunity to cast a ballot.
Thank you to Hannah Burling from Fair Districts, New Mexico, and Leonard Gorman from the Navajo Nation Human Rights Commission. You can watch Gwyneth's entire interview right now on the New Mexico in Focus YouTube page. Now, earlier this month, the Biden administration publicly announced its decision to send cluster bombs to Ukraine. 20 countries have banned these types of weapons, though neither the U.S., Russia, or Ukraine have ratified that convention. For 2 decades, New Mexico journalists Karen Coates and Jerry Redfern have documented the long-term human and environmental impacts of Vietnam-era cluster bomb campaigns in Cambodia and Laos, including in their film Eternal Harvest. Now get this, the U.S. military dropped 4 billion pounds of explosives in Southeast Asia between 1964 and 1973. About 30% of those bombs didn't detonate, and they still remain a threat to people today. The filmmakers joined Laura Paskus in our Albuquerque studios to talk about what makes these bombs so dangerous for so long.
Karen Coates, Jerry Redfern, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
So when you heard that President Biden approved sending cluster bombs to Ukraine, what was your initial reaction?
Here we go again. I had other thoughts too that I probably shouldn't say on public TV.
Right. So cluster bombs are banned by many countries by a convention that was adopted in 2010, and even Congress has placed some restrictions on cluster bombs. Jerry, can you talk about why they're so bad?
Well, the reason they're really bad is like their very basic general nature. So a cluster bomb is actually like a big bomb with a bunch of tiny little bombs inside of it. And then when you drop it, the big bomb opens up and shoots all the tiny little bombs out. Like, for example, a size of something like this. This is half of a cluster munition that was dropped over Laos probably 55 years ago. So you'll have maybe 600 of these inside a much larger bomb, cracks open in the air, scatters these over the course of 2 or 3 football fields, and exploding all over the place, or not, depending. I mean, the cluster munitions that were made and that have been made and that were made until recently have all sorts of different purposes. You know, anti-personnel, to try to kill people, to try to penetrate through armor, or to actually, like this one did, it would send out tripwires to act as a landmine, so that if somebody was walking nearby it, they'd trip over the wire and it would explode. So there are all sorts of reasons. The big problem with them is that you're throwing so many out there that you inevitably have a failure rate. And if you're throwing out hundreds at a time or thousands at a time, or in the case of Laos, Vietnam, hundreds of millions at a time, those failure rates add up. And then you're left with millions of these things in the ground years afterward that are found by farmers or kids, and it kills them. It kills them.
So the United States has millions of these bombs in storage. And before we dive into your reporting on Laos and Cambodia, I just wanted to ask, who builds and sells and profits off of these bombs?
Well, just to clarify, as far as we know, as is reported, the United States is no longer manufacturing cluster munitions. There had been an effort for quite a few years to try to come up with a so-called better cluster munition with a lower failure rate below 1%. No one has ever been able to achieve that. And so I think it was in 2016 when the last company who was making them pulled out and said, we can't do this anymore. However, there's still desire to come up with something better.
I was surprised because in a recent Washington Post story it said, although the United States has used cluster munitions in every major war since Korea, no new ones are believed to have been produced for years. So we don't actually know if somebody's making them, or...
Again, just to clarify, that isn't the focus area of our reporting, but as far as the research I have done, I have not come across anybody who today is making them in this country. Okay. However, they are being manufactured in other countries.
Okay. So you've reported on the impacts of cluster bombs in Cambodia and Laos for about 20 years. I was wondering, on the ground, what did you learn? What are some of the stories that you've heard, the human impacts that you've seen there?
We had been living and working in Southeast Asia for quite some time, but it was in 2005, going way back to then, we were working on an archaeology story. There's a large area called the Plain of Jars, full of these massive ancient stone jars. That area during the war was heavily bombed. And so today, and at that time, archaeologists and anybody studying the jars had to go with a clearance group, a bomb clearance group, to make sure that the area was safe. Many of the jars had been destroyed or damaged in the bombings. And in the course of reporting this story, we were in that area for about 2.5, 3 weeks, and we heard of more than 20 accidents with cluster munitions just around that area. So we kind of looked at each other and said, we need to do something more on this. And we met a 10-year-old boy named Beek, who was in the hospital just a few days before. He'd been out working in his field, and he hit something and it blew up and caused, major damage to his belly and his face. And that was sort of what really motivated us to look into this deeper. And over many years then we encountered, I don't know how many stories like that.
So these were bombs that were dropped in the 60s and 70s, is that right? And so I'm imagining that there were terrible impacts at that time, but now decades and decades later still?
Yeah, so the bombs don't necessarily stop working. And I mean, it's a bit of a misnomer to call them duds. I mean, they just haven't gone off, right? But they're still, in most cases, completely capable of going off at this point. And that's really the big issue. So they found that what happened a lot of times, particularly in Southeast Asia, you have a monsoon season, for example, and if you're bombing during the monsoon season when the ground is essentially jello, the bombs will sink into the ground during that season instead of detonating like they were supposed to. And then they can churn. It's a term called turbation, how the soils churn all on their own between seasons and such. So things that can be dropped in one place, they fall, you drop a bomb here, it doesn't detonate, it can churn through the ground, pop up somewhere else. And these sort of dangers just, keep on moving through fields year after year, decade after decade. And these things still happen. They still find things in Laos today, and Cambodia, and Vietnam.
So it sounds like there's obviously impacts on individual people and families and communities. What about the governments? How are they handling having to deal with this US-caused problem all these decades later?
In Southeast Asia, in Laos in particular, that's a really difficult question to answer, and it's a tricky question because there are so many complicating factors about the Lao government, which is a communist government.
So the United States actually does shell out a great deal of money. Well, they say they shell out a great deal of money. They call it a great deal of money every year to help these countries clear up bombs there in Laos, in Cambodia, in Vietnam. The idea, though, they've been doing this has been going on since the early 90s. So that's 30 years. We're still paying millions upon millions of dollars a year to help clean up this issue. They're still finding bombs. The governments do want to work to get rid of these problems to greater or lesser extent. I think for the most part, they all really want to get rid of it. But for an economy like Laos, which is very much a lower developing economy, they also, I think, often don't want to scare off investors. So they don't talk about it as much as Vietnam does or as much as Cambodia does, because they don't want to scare people from showing up and doing things that Laos has space and money to do, like mining or forestry and such, which are dangerous if you don't work with clearance teams.
Right. In a 2016 story, Karen, you wrote, "The craters are not just vestiges of war, they're geographic testaments to the anthropogenic force of bombs. Research shows that when a bomb bursts, it alters long-term soil formation, vegetation growth, and hydrology. It also affects how people use the land in the future. It's a phenomenon so disruptive that it's given rise to a new field of science with an evocative name, bomb turbation." Can we talk about those environmental impacts?
Yeah, and Jerry had talked a bit about this already. Anytime you have an explosion, it's going to turbate the soil, the sediments, the rock, whatever is in the environment. When you have multiple explosions in a place, which is exactly what happens with cluster munitions, you have, bomb, 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 there's an even greater effect. So in places in Laos, for example, as we have seen, there are still large craters and small craters all over the countryside, to the point where 50 years later, they're deep enough, they're prominent enough that people use them as ponds. They use them for fish. Buffalo will sort of wallow in the water in there. The changes in the landscape are not necessarily good or bad, but what happens is that anytime you have explosions like that on a battlefield, it does alter the landscape. It means that certain things might not grow there in the future that had in the past. It can change the vegetation, the soil structure, as I was saying. So it is, there's a definite human-caused change to the environment and the way that people perceive the land as well. And another big thing about that, and a similarity between, say, Ukraine today and Laos, both are very heavily, they're farming communities, farming areas. And so if you're a farmer and your land has been bombed, your land has been covered with cluster munitions, the way you see that land is going to completely change, because you are then afraid to go out anywhere. Even if there's just one that didn't go off, you don't know where it is, so you can't use it safely.
Yeah. So I know you don't want to speak for the people of Laos or Cambodia by any means, but in your experience of interviewing people, what do you think that the people of Laos and Cambodia might want Americans and Russians and Ukrainians to really understand about using these bombs and really embracing their use in this war?
I think they'd be horrified. I think they'd be absolutely horrified. I don't think anybody we've ever met has been anything but absolutely crushed by having come in contact with these things. I mean, emotionally and then physically as well. A key thing to remember, sometimes people conflate landmines with cluster munitions, and they're actually quite different. There was a cover story in the New York Times this past weekend talking about landmines in Ukraine, and the key part about most of that is that a landmine is designed to injure a soldier, so that two other soldiers have to come onto the field and take that person off. So you actually get 3 for 1 that are taken off the field. These cluster munitions, like this originally, which is now a lamp, these things were designed to kill. So when people find them in the ground, generally speaking, they don't survive. I mean, this is an incredible danger, right? And they're small and they bury. And when these things are in the ground, you can barely see that they're there. They look like rocks. Or if you find one like this in a tree, it looks like a toy to a kid. So they're a totally different animal. They're small, they're hard to find, and they're meant to be completely and utterly deadly.
Well, thank you both for your reporting and talking with me about all of this today. It's an important and frustrating story, so thank you.
Thank you, Laura.
Thanks, Laura.
Thanks to Jerry and Karen for all their reporting about the dangers of cluster bombs. To see a chilling video of Jerry describing how one of these things works, head over to the Our Land Instagram page. Now be sure to tune in to next week's show for correspondent Russell Contreras' conversation with Tina Cordova of the Tularosa Downwinders. It'll be especially relevant with the Christopher Nolan expected blockbuster biopic Oppenheimer opening in theaters today. Thanks again for joining us, for staying informed and engaged. We'll see you again next week in Focus.
Funding for New Mexico in Focus provided by the viewers like you.